It was supposed to be just another quiet evening, but in a matter of seconds, everything turned tense. A black man was driving home from work when flashing lights filled his rearview mirror. He pulled over, calm but cautious, not knowing what was about to unfold. Two officers stepped out of their car, hands already near their weapons. Their voices were sharp, demanding, filled with suspicion before they even asked for his name. The man kept his hands visible, speaking respectfully, but every word seemed to be ignored. Within moments, the situation escalated. Guns were drawn. Fear filled the air, and the tension could be cut with a knife. People passing by slowed down, some recording, sensing that something serious was about to happen. The black man remained steady, refusing to let anger take over, even as the officers shouted at him like he was already guilty. He knew one wrong move could change everything. But then, just as the officers tightened their grip, he reached slowly into his jacket, not for a weapon, but for something that would flip the entire situation upside down. What happened next stunned everyone, leaving the crowd speechless and the officers frozen in disbelief. And in that single moment, the entire story took a dramatic turn. The officers froze as the man slowly pulled out a small leather wallet. Their eyes stayed locked on his hands, fingers still tight around their weapons. The crowd whispered, unsure of what they were witnessing. The man's calmness stood out in sharp contrast to the chaos around him. His voice was steady, almost too calm for the moment. He asked them to take a closer look before they made a mistake they could never take back. For years, he had served his community as one of the very people now pointing guns at him. Behind the badge tucked inside that wallet was a story of dedication, long hours, and sacrifices made to protect others. Yet here he was, treated like a suspect in the very streets he once patrolled. The officers, however, weren't ready to lower their guard. Their expressions shifted between suspicion and confusion, but their voices stayed firm, still demanding answers as if his words carried no weight. The man thought about his family, his fellow officers who trusted him, and the irony of the moment. He had put his life on the line in dangerous situations, but never had he felt this vulnerable. The air grew heavier, silence mixing with fear. As everyone waited to see which direction the night would turn next, the silence on the roadside felt endless. The man held his badge out clearly, his hands steady, but the officers hesitated. Their eyes darted between him, the crowd recording with their phones, and each other, unsure whether to admit they had gone too far. Every second only deepened the tension. The man's heart raced, not out of fear for himself, but for what this moment could become. He knew stories like this never stayed private. Soon, the world would see, and judgment would follow. Among the onlookers, a young woman whispered that she had seen the man before at community meetings. He was known for mentoring teenagers, teaching them about responsibility, discipline, and even how to avoid conflicts with law enforcement. To her, it was unthinkable that someone like him could be mistaken for a threat. Yet the officers still stood rigid, as though the truth in front of them wasn't enough. Inside their cruiser, the radio crackled with calls from dispatch, but neither officer moved. The weight of their actions hung in the air, a quiet reminder that one choice could change lives forever. The man, still calm, asked them again to recognize who he was. But instead of easing, the tension only grew sharper, leaving everyone wondering whether reason or pride would decide what happened next. The night air felt electric, every breath heavy with anticipation. The man's badge glinted under the flashing red and blue lights, but still, the officers' hands didn't move from their weapons. The crowd edged closer, phones raised higher, each second adding fuel to the tension. People whispered, some demanding the officers back down, others too afraid to say a word. The man stood motionless, his voice steady as he repeated, "I'm one of you." But his words seemed to vanish in the air, unheard. One officer's finger twitched near the trigger, his jaw tight, while the other kept glancing at the badge as if torn between instinct and denial. The man's calm only seemed to irritate them more, as if they couldn't accept that their assumptions might be wrong. For the man, time slowed. He thought of the oath he had taken, the trust of his community, and the weight of representing not just himself, but everyone who could be in his position. The crowd grew restless, voices rising, anger mixing with fear. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance, another unit approaching, raising the stakes even higher. No one knew what would happen first, the arrival of backup, the officers making a final choice, or a single mistake that would turn everything into tragedy. The moment balanced on the edge of something irreversible. The faint wail of sirens grew louder, and the flashing lights of another patrol car lit up the tense scene. The crowd gasped, unsure if backup would make things better or worse. The man didn't flinch, but inside, he knew the arrival of more officers could push the standoff to a breaking point. He still held his badge high, his voice calm but firm, repeating the truth, yet with every second, the tension only deepened. Then came the twist no one expected. From within the crowd, another voice cut through the noise. A retired officer who recognized the man. He stepped forward, raising his hands so everyone could see he wasn't a threat. His words carried weight as he called out the man's name and confirmed his years of service. For the first time, doubt flickered across the officers' faces, but instead of relief, the moment grew heavier. Their pride, their authority, and the eyes of the watching crowd boxed them into a corner. The backup unit pulled up fast, tires screeching. More officers jumped out, hands on their belts, scanning the scene with confusion. The tension doubled as commands overlapped, lights strobed against the dark, and the crowd shouted louder. It was no longer just about one badge, it was about control, reputation, and the thin line between truth and disaster. The street had become a stage. Every eye fixed on the man holding his badge against the flashing lights. The backup officers froze as the retired cop's words echoed. This wasn't just anyone, this was a fellow officer. For a split second, the tension cracked. One of the new arrivals stepped forward, his voice steady but firm, telling the others to lower their weapons. The crowd cheered nervously, phones still recording, desperate for the scene to end without tragedy. Finally, the first two officers hesitated, their hands loosened on their guns, their eyes shifting from the badge to the growing sea of witnesses. The man never moved, his calm presence the only thing holding the moment together. And then, slowly, the weapons dropped. The crowd exhaled in relief, but before the man could speak, the unexpected twist hit. The retired officer stepped closer and quietly revealed something no one saw coming. The man wasn't just any cop. He was a decorated detective from Internal Affairs, known for investigating misconduct within the department. The realization struck like lightning. The same officers who had pulled their guns on him now understood he had the power to hold them accountable. What began as a dangerous mistake had flipped entirely. The officer stood speechless, the crowd buzzing with shock, as the man finally lowered his badge and asked one quiet question. Now, do you understand? The street slowly quieted, though the weight of what had just happened lingered in the air. The officers who had pulled their weapons shifted uncomfortably, their authority suddenly feeling fragile under the gaze of the crowd. The backup team kept their distance, unsure if they were witnessing the end of a mistake or the beginning of a reckoning. The man slipped his badge back into his jacket, his calm expression unchanged, though his eyes carried the disappointment of someone who had seen this happen one too many times. The retired officer placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent show of respect, while the young woman from the crowd stepped forward to thank him for the work he had done in their community. Phones were still recording, but now the energy had shifted. People wanted to remember the lesson in this moment, not just the danger. The man spoke quietly, but every word carried. He reminded the officers and the crowd that trust is fragile, that respect has to be earned on both sides. It wasn't anger in his tone, but truth, shaped by years of service. As the flashing lights faded and people drifted away, the story left behind a powerful message. Injustice can appear anywhere, even in uniform, but so can integrity. And courage strong enough to change the ending.